Hi, this is Carl Rust, and I've worked in schools for over 30 years. I've learned a lot about how people learn, and I wrote a book called Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn: How We Can Transform Schools and Reintroduce Natural Learning. Hi, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 1, Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn. The title of my book, How We Can Transform Schools and Reintroduce Natural Learning. So I'm going to talk probably weekly, hope I can get one done every week, about education, some things that are going on, some things that I've noticed or seen. I've been working in schools for 30 years. I was an elementary teacher for 17 years. I taught mostly 6th grade. I taught 4th, 5th, 2nd, but mostly 6th. And then I went on to become an assistant principal for 8 years or so, and then I ran an alternative program. It was during this time that I ran the alternative program that I discovered some things that I didn't know. And I always had struggled being a teacher in school because it seemed like something was wrong, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. I always struggled with things like grading and homework and, requiring kids to do certain things at certain times. I just never... That's just how you did it. So I tried to make it fun. I tried to make it interesting. But it wasn't until a homeschool parent told me about Peter Gray's book, Free to Learn, and then I started doing some research. And I'll talk more about all that at different times throughout the podcast. But so this is number 1. This is the first one. And I would be very happy to hear what everybody thinks about what I'm doing. I think the topic for today is just going to be kind of an introduction to the idea of one of my things that I believe in is unschooling school. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. I'm getting ready to go to Aero Conference this week, and I'm presenting on Saturday on the topic of unschooling school, how to take control of your own education. So maybe I'll talk about that a little bit. Let's see. I meant to grab something. Hold on. So one of the segments I'm going to try to do every week is something in the news or something that's happened to me. And I've got a couple things today. And maybe I'll save that for when we're talking about grades. But this is a little cartoon I saw on the paper. And I'll hold it up there. Maybe I'll take a picture and put it in the... A little boy is taking a test, and he says, "I hate multiple choice tests. They always favor the house." And that's bringing up an important point about tests and grades, is because really they're very, very subjective. And I don't know if that's a new concept for you, but tests and grades are very, very subjective. So what grades and tests are really about is, let me see if I can figure out what the teacher wants me to put down on this paper. And doesn't always have much to do with learning. Because we know that real learning comes from inside a person. So when you have a question, you have a need to find out something, and then you take the steps necessary by, in the modern age, Googling or asking someone or trial and error, you figure it out. And that's real learning, as opposed to what I consider fake learning. So fake learning is when I go into a classroom, a teacher talks, I take notes or I listen or I do homework, and then later on I have a test where I have to figure out, okay, is it A, B, C, or D? And on a topic that I'm probably not that interested in. So that's kind of an interesting little cartoon that's on the paper. But here's something that I noticed this weekend. I was visiting with my son and my grandsons, and my son had a 3D printer. And the boys were really interested in trying out the 3D printer, trying different designs, and how does this work and how does that work. And then contrast that to a few years back when I was at middle school, our program was housed, even though it was for elementary kids, we had an alternative program that was housed in a middle school. And this middle school, through a grant, had received, I think, 3 or 4 3D printers. And guess what? They never got used because the teachers couldn't figure out, how does this fit into my curriculum? How am I going to use a 3D printer? I'm a math teacher. How do I use a 3D printer? Or I'm an English teacher. But I guarantee you, if you would have put those 3D printers in a common space and let the kids have access to them, they would have used them, and they would have figured out the best ways to use them. And that's the beauty of natural learning, because when I'm curious, and some kids don't care about 3D printers, so they just walk by and they don't pay any attention. But there's probably probably a fair number that would be interested in figuring it out. And so why not give them access to 3D printer and let them try it out, just like my grandsons were trying out the 3D printer at their father's house. Okay, so why do I think schools need to change? So I'll keep plugging my book, Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn. And in the introduction, or in the foreword, I make the point that schools have not actually changed much in the last 100 years. But the world has changed a lot. If you think about 100 years ago, 100 years ago, so it's 2023, 1923, there were cars around, there were automobiles around, but a lot of people didn't own one. No television, no radio. There might have been radio to a degree. I'd have to do a little research on that, but no television. There were movies. They were probably silent at that time. There were telephones, yes. Telegraph, yes. But maybe not in every house. Every house probably didn't have a telephone. No, of course, no internet, no computers, nothing like that in 1923. If you walked into a schoolhouse in 1923, you probably see rows of desks, young people sitting at them, older person standing in front of the room talking, and people are taking notes or whatever they're doing, or filling in their exercise books. They take a test, then they go on to the next. If you go into a school today, yes, you're going to see computers. You're going to see kids sneaking on cell phones, actually, too. But in some ways, the picture is not going to look radically different. They're still sitting in rows and desks. There's still somebody standing in front of the room talking. People are still writing things down, maybe on their iPad now. But the actual substance of the school has not changed that much. We've put some nice window dressing on in some cases. In some schools you go into, there'll be some things that'll be different. But the basic power structure is the same, and that's where the problem lies. So I identified in my book 9 assumptions or habits, you might think of them, that conventional schools follow that I think we really need to think about in the 21st century. And there were 9. I wrote this book a few years ago. Maybe I could think of more now, I don't know. But these are the 9 that I came up with when I published this book in, what year was it? 2019. Number 1, we assume that children should be grouped by age in grade levels. And that's something that we've been doing for a long time. Some places have experimented with different ways of grouping, but that's the predominant way that kids are grouped in schools, by age. Number 2, all learners should learn the same thing at the same time. Why? Why is that? Well, for one thing, it's a lot more convenient for the adult. Because for planning purposes, if I'm going to make lesson plans, of course, I don't want to have to make 25 different lesson plans. If I have 25 young people in my class, I don't want to make 25. I want to make one lesson plan. One thing used to drive me a little crazy was I was always trying to figure out how to meet individual kids' needs and still make one lesson plan. Well, it's pretty difficult. Number 3, play is not as important as instruction and should be an extra. So we have this concept in school of work. We're doing work. Get your work done. Where's your work? Where's your homework? Get your work out. We have this work, this thing embedded in our minds called work. But we know that mammals learn through play. That's how mammals learn. Work, in some cases, for adults, is where you go to a place you don't want to go and you do things you don't want to do because you choose to, because they're paying you. But school work is people going someplace they may not want to go, doing things they don't want to do, but they're not getting a paycheck and they don't have any choice. Last time I checked, if you're working at McDonald's or Burger King or Nike or wherever you're working and you decide you don't want to work there anymore, you quit. Can't quit school until you're a certain age unless you have some enlightened parents, which we'll probably touch on at some point. Number 4, learners and their families should only be marginally involved in making decisions about how the school is run. So schools generally are authoritarian. There's a school board and a superintendent, central office. They make decisions that come down to the building principal. The building principal relays those to the teacher. The teachers take those to the kids. And then the parents find out about it later, if at all. A lot of parents have no idea what's going on at school, other than their memories of what it was like when they were in school. But to me, this is absolutely upside down. We should look at the needs of the families and the learners first. The teachers should try to be figuring out how to make that available. Principals should be supporting teachers. Central office should be supporting principals. It should be actually the opposite. So what I think of it as a pyramid with the superintendent, school board at the top and the kids and families at the bottom, I would turn that upside down and make the kids and the families the main decision makers about school. Number 5, testing and grades are necessary and help adults determine what students already know and what they need to learn. We already talked about the little cartoon. Testing and grades do not tell you what somebody knows. They tell you what somebody can put on a piece of paper on a test. We use pieces of paper, and in a lot of cases in the modern time, the iPad or the Chromebook have just taken the place of a piece of paper. So we have people choose answers from a list or write an essay, and then we evaluate that essay. We look at it and say, okay, obviously they learned what we wanted them to learn, or they didn't learn it, or I don't know what's going on. So we slap a grade on that and we rank people from top to bottom, A to F. But those rankings don't really have a lot to do with learning, because I already kind of gave you a definition. What I think of as natural learning is when I'm curious, I want to find something out, and I go and look it up, or I talk to somebody, or I try to build something, or I do something about it. When was the last time you gave your auto mechanic a grade? Okay, number 6, coercion and compliance leads to good citizenship and a peaceful life. So we have this idea that teachers and other adults at school tell kids what to do, the kid does it, and that everything's going to be wonderful. But the problem with that is, if we never allow kids to practice decision making, and we never allow them to practice planning, problem solving, teamwork, we never allow them to practice negotiation, compromise, and then we just keep telling them what to do. Even our 16, 17, 18-year-olds, a lot of times we're telling them what to do all day long. There's some more freedom as you get older, I will admit that, but it's not a lot. And then when you turn 18, the magic age, and go off to college or work or whatever you're going to do, now you have to start making decisions. Now you have to make a budget. Now you have to pay bills. Now you have to make decisions. And we wonder why at work, managers and bosses complain about these kids, all they do is stand around and wait to be told what to do. Why don't they show some initiative? Well, they're used to being told what to do. They're used to an adult telling them what to do all the time. Number 7, we need a school building with classrooms in order to maximize learning. So at some point in history, we decided that learning was something that happened at the schoolhouse from 7 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon or whatever the hours are. And then the other times of the day, you're not learning. And that's totally contrary to what we know about learning. Learning is happening all the time, everywhere. There is not, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinion, there is not a minute of the day that you're not learning. I'm not sure what happens after you die, but at least if you're alive and breathing, you're learning. So, do we have to have a school building? Is it necessary? I think for a lot of families, it's very convenient, very nice to have a place for kids to go during the day, especially the parents work. It's nice to have a place, a safe place for kids to go, but it doesn't have to be a school building. It could be a forest, it could be a nature center, it could be a church basement. It doesn't have to be a school building. And classrooms are designed to control kids, not to maximize learning. A lot of teachers work really hard, and I'm a big fan of teachers, so don't ever let me think I'm disrespecting or getting down on teachers. But some teachers work very hard to make their classroom a good learning environment, and I applaud them. But they're starting with their, kind of handcuffed and their feet hobbled because the way the classroom is set up is not conducive. So you have to work against that. Number 8, we need to supervise children in order to keep them safe. This is an interesting topic that's probably going to take a while to unwrap, but when I worked in schools, people were very, very paranoid about leaving kids alone. Like, we can't leave them alone, somebody's got to be watching them. But I don't know about you, it depends on your age and your family situation probably, but when I was growing up, I used to spend a lot of time away from adults. Kids would play in the neighborhood, we would go places, vacant lots, and I remember once we lived in a little subdivision and there was undeveloped land behind it, and we used to go back there all the time. My parents probably had no idea where I was. Why do we think we need to supervise kids 24/7? Actually, it was an interesting experiment. I don't have to dig it out. Peter Gray sent me the link to it, but early in the 20th century, I think it was in Boston, a school principal tried an experiment where he took the worst kids in the city and put them in a class. No teacher, just them. And I don't know how often they were checked on, but they did wonderful. They did wonderful things in that room. They helped each other. They were kind to each other. And there's the old Lord of the Flies theory that, kids will attack each other. But in actual practice, there was a situation where kids were stranded on an island and they formed a wonderful community and they got along great. So we want to keep kids safe, that's for sure. But we don't have to watch them 24/7. Number 9, the best way to learn something is to sit and listen to a teacher talk. And we know in our hearts that's not true. We absolutely know that's not true because we hate it ourselves. We get called to these meetings. If you work in a business, even people work at school, we call these meetings and somebody's standing in front of the room talking blah, 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 blah. And we're like, oh my God, when is this going to be over? I just want to get out of here. So those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So here's the question. Why do I think schools need to change? The conventional schooling system most of us know and went through doesn't work for a lot of kids. Works for some kids, and I would argue it doesn't work very well, but it does work for some people. So I've been in school a large portion of my life. I went to school, I went to public school, I went to junior high, I went to high school, I went to college. Then I got a job in a school, and I've been in schools, in and out of schools of all different kinds for a long time. A lot of us suffered in school, and there were times I really suffered. I don't know about you. It was boring, frustrating, annoying, and it made us feel like failures. Because we wanted to do well. Kids want to do well, but we didn't measure up, or we weren't terribly motivated. And check out unschoolingschool.com. You'll see lots of resources and lots of information about how you can take control. So the basic idea of unschooling school is that public schools belong to the public. Public schools belong to taxpayers. We pay the bills, so we should be able to have the kind of school we want. If you're happy with conventional education and you think it works for your young learner, great. But if you want something different, and a lot of parents are frustrated because they know something's wrong. It's kind of like when I was back in the classroom. They know something's wrong. They just can't figure out what it is. And some people will even tell you, I went to school, I survived it. School is school, that's just the way it is. It's supposed to be that way. But we can change it. We can ask for what we want. So if there's parts of the day that work really well, you could participate in those parts. If there's parts of the day that don't work, just don't participate. One thing that you can do for your child, if you have a school-age kid that's in a conventional school right now, one thing you can tell them is, grades are not important. We don't care about grades. Grades are totally subjective. They don't mean anything. And I will spend at least one podcast, probably numerous podcasts, talking about grades because I struggled with grades throughout. And I did long-term sub in 2 schools in the past 2 years. And I was expected to give grades, and I still struggled with it. But I would tell kids, grades are not important. They don't measure your learning. They tell how well you measured up to the teacher's expectations. In a lot of cases, how neat are you? How organized are you? How well can you follow, in some cases, really weird directions? And are you concerned about it? That's what a grade is. A grade tells how well I please the teacher. So number 1, if you want to make life a little more enjoyable for your younger learner, then just tell them grades are not important. So I don't think of, I've tried to get away from thinking of teacher and student and those power role models. So now what I think of is I'm an older learner, and a lot of you are younger than me, so you're younger learners. And we're co-learners. So if I'm in a space with you and we're learning together, then we're co-learners. All right, so I think I'm about done for today. I'm going to try to do this weekly and have a topic and possibly kind of work our way through the book. These books are out there on Amazon and Better World Books and Barnes & Nobles and wherever. You can get this book. If you're interested in finding out more about my ideas about education, you can check that out. Check out unschoolingschool.com and see what kind of radical ideas are up there. And I'm also a musician. I'm in a band called The Rush Show, and it would be wonderful if you could go to Spotify or Apple Music or Pandora or YouTube, wherever you do music, and like, follow, subscribe, heart. And just follow this podcast and subscribe if you can. Send it out to your friends. I would really appreciate it. And I think we're going to talk about some interesting topics in the area of education. Get out of the way and let kids learn. Stop doing things that are getting in the way of learning. And let's see if we can't make school and learning fun. Nothing wrong with that. This is Carl Rust. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.